week, but doesn't usually have a bad glare. And it has already garnered rave reviews from every single place that has reviewed it. She is everywhere this month. It's been named a best book of the month by about 15 different websites. All of the pre-reviews have been great. She's been getting a ton of fantastic press. And apparently a viral TikTok star made a video all about Maggie. Maggie, where can people find that video about you?
It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook. I posted it to I'm very impressed with this video. So I put it everywhere.
It's not safe for work.
It is. It is totally safe for work. His original video is not safe for work.
It's not safe to show around children. But prior to writing this book, Maggie, of course, was a journalist here in the Coachella Valley for many years at the Desert Sun. But subsequent to her time working at Desert Sun, she has appeared essentially in every major publication in America. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, McSweeney's. She's basically won the EGOT for journalism by appearing in every single major publication in America. Also, for the last, I think, 3 years, maybe 2.5 years, I've been very lucky to spend every week with Maggie on your radio here in the Coachella Valley as we co-host the show Open Book on KCOD. And in fact, this conversation that we're having right now, we're going to put up on our podcast version of Open Book sometime next week as well, so you can share it with friends and family. And then on top of everything else with that, Maggie and I are dear close friends. And so I'm going to try not to just tell inside jokes to her, and I'm going to ask her questions I already know the answers to. And then if she lies, I'm going to tell you.
Which I am going to do.
She is going to lie. There's almost no chance she won't. So we're going to talk for about 40 minutes. If you have questions, go ahead and type them out into the Q&A section, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A right there. And after Maggie and I are done talking, we'll bring Nancy, one of our events program members, out to read your questions out loud. Unfortunately, we can't see you. We're going to try and do something at the end. We don't know if it will work, where you're allowed to turn on your cameras so Maggie can see all of you, all 240 of you that have shown up here today. So we'll try doing that as well. So ladies and gentlemen, Maggie Downs. Congratulations, Maggie.
Thank
Big day.
You. You know, this is not exactly the way I imagined it. So for all these years, you know, I've been working at UCR Palm Desert, and I would go to these arts and letters events, and I would dream about having my own and being on stage with you. And I mean, this is cool too, but it's not the same as being in a room full of people. But I'm so happy for everyone who showed up today.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. And just so you know, people that are showing up for this is just the start. We're going to have a bunch more programming over the course of the summer as well. We're dedicated to keeping you guys entertained as much as we possibly can. But let's start talking about you, Maggie, and about your book and about everything. We're gonna cover your whole life.
Okay. You know what? All right. I have a drink that's this big. Let's
From birth
go.
to this very moment.
Okay.
But let's start about the present time. You are a person who has devoted their life essentially to adventure and to going around the world and to meeting different people and to saying yes to getting outside of your comfort zone. And now in this time when your book is out all about those things, you haven't left your condo since March.
Right. Yeah.
For someone, so you know, I don't have a tremendous amount of wanderlust. Like, I'm pretty happy just to go to Trader Joe's. What's it been like for someone like yourself who is constantly in motion to have this sort of moment of stasis?
It's really challenging. You know, I've been sitting at home at night Googling things like secret beaches, you know, which if they're secret, they're not really on Google. But like, I've been trying to find like very safe loopholes because I don't want to endanger myself or my family. But I've been, you know, I'm itchy. I want to get out of the house. And so I have I have been doing a certain amount of that. Like I've been going hiking, but I can't go on my regular hiking trails because it's packed with other people who
Right.
they all want to get out of the house. So everyone's on the trails that I usually hike. And I don't feel safe doing that. So I've been driving like way out into the Mojave, going out to like Amboy,
Oh,
where
God.
where I don't run
Where
into
the,
anyone else.
where the hills have eyes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There are 5 people in Amboy, and I've met all of them. So before, I didn't see any of them like 3 weeks ago when I was there. And I've just been trying to be really strategic about trying to have adventure, but
Right.
in a very limited way.
Well, when people are reading your book right now, I mean, the cool thing I think for folks stuck in their houses that are reading this book is you're not going to Disney World. You know, you're going to really off the beaten path places, even when you're in these sort of big cities that we might know of, or even when you're hiking Machu Picchu. You know, you're not stopping in at every tourist vista and writing about it. But I'm sort of curious, you know, when people don't have the chance to go out into the world, what is it that they're missing? You know, what is the thing that fulfills you about being elsewhere that people might not have at this time in their lives?
I think for me and many people, travel just makes me a better person. You know, it makes me fire on all cylinders. It
Mm-hmm.
makes me not just feel alive, but usually if I'm out of the country, for example, you know, I have to figure out the currency conversion. I'm trying to figure out the language. Like I feel like I'm really, my mind is alive and my cells are kind of moving. Like, you know, just things are happening in my body, and I like that. And and it makes me really vulnerable, and it makes me a more humble person. And I feel like I have to interact with people.
Right.
Um, I have to ask questions. I have to be friendlier. And so I think I'm a better person when I travel. And it doesn't have to be huge travel. It's just even getting out of your town, even going on a road trip, I think is really changing the people that you interact with. It's changing your normal routine. And that like really enlivens you. And that's really life affirming. So I think we're missing that right now.
Well, I mean, and it's something that you talk about a lot in the book is sort of being emotionally vulnerable when you're out there in the world. You know, so many of the things that you experience, it ends up that someone carries your emotion, or you carry someone else's emotion in the places that you go. And I'm thinking about, you know, when you're in Rwanda, or right after your mother dies, and you're being showered by a woman in Egypt. And, you know, all of a sudden, all of these intricacies of life that you're sharing with a stranger who has to carry that weight for you. Is there something about people that you don't have a deeper, long-standing connection with that makes that vulnerability easier?
I don't think so. I think it's just the nature of travel that it kind of fast forwards relationships, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because I've met people when I've been traveling and we are instant best friends, you know, and we don't have all the BS about like, you know, there's no small talk because there's no opportunity for that. You know, you get right down to like, here's who I am. Let me see who you are. And tomorrow, like we could both be on a bus to different places. And it's a really honest way to meet people.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have to trust people. And so, like I met people when I was traveling and I'm still friends with them. And I bet some of them are on this call or on this event right now. Like you know, I met so many great people when I was traveling, and I still feel like some of them know me better than some of my best friends,
Right.
because we did have that like really kind of hastened relationship.
And that sort of intense experience of, you know, doing something. Like there's a great moment in the book very early on where you sort of have to make a life or death decision with a bunch of strangers. You're stuck in a truck with some other tourists in the middle of a blizzard in a foreign country, and you have to
Yeah.
decide whether to stay. It's like the worst choose your own adventure ever. Stay in one place and die, or drive to another place and die.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a woman in that section, Gemma, who suggests eating me because she was like, if we all like, if it comes to that, if we're stranded, let's eat Maggie. And I am still friends with Gemma on Instagram. So
That's a strange relationship. Like when you know she's coveted like you for a snack because you're grass fed, because you're a vegan.
Right. Well, and Instagram didn't exist when I was doing this trip. So like our relationship has, progressed to different platforms.
Well, let's back up a little bit because a big part of the book and a big part of the journey, of course, is your relationship to your family, and specifically your relationship to your mother, who during the course of the trip is dying of Alzheimer's. And it's not a surprise because it's on the cover of the book that she dies of Alzheimer's while you're on this trip. But it's also about sort of your memories of her and your memories of your childhood in Ohio, which seems like the opposite of all the things that you do as an adult. It seems like from the outside, a kind of solidly middle class or lower middle class life where your life was lived on the block around your house. Would that be accurate?
Yes, that is absolutely accurate. Well, not entirely accurate, because I did grow up with a lot of people who never left that neighborhood, and they loved that neighborhood, and they've been in those places for generations, and they will stay there, and it's a great town, but there was also a military base, so I feel like that had kind of an international aspect that there were friends that I made, and I knew they would move 2 years later when their families were reassigned someplace. So there were a lot of like military dads who would, marry women abroad, like my own dad did. Right. He married a woman when he was stationed in Germany. So so there were a lot of families like that.
Well, your family is unusual, not merely because all families are unusual, but you are the youngest of 3 children, but your siblings are both more than a decade older than you.
Right.
So in function, it must have been when you were a child, sort of like you were an only child because you were the only kid in the house. Would that be right?
That is right. So my sister and brother both moved out of the house when I was 7.
So you had 11 years where you were the one child in the house with your mom and your dad. Mm-hmm. And how old were you when your mom started to show signs of having Alzheimer's?
I was in my early 20s, and so growing up, it was a pretty strict household. And then when I went away to college, I went kind of nuts. I went a little wild. So then when I got my first job and I moved to a small town called Zanesville, Ohio, I was living in Zanesville. It was my first time like really on my own. I had my own apartment. I was paying my own bills. I had a futon. Like I had all this stuff.
Chair.
Yeah. I had a boyfriend named Brad. Like, I was set. And
dealer was named Trevor. It was great.
I mean, do you know Trevor?
We all know Trevor.
Yeah. So it was that kind of situation where I was working late at night. I was the nighttime copy editor for a newspaper, and I would work until like midnight until we sent the paper off to the printers, and then I would go to the bar until the bar closed. And then I was friends with all the bartenders. So the bartenders would bring over like cases of beer to my house, and then we would party all night. So that's like, to give you some context, that's my lifestyle. I wasn't going home. I wasn't spending time with my parents. I wasn't like having these emotional conversations with my family about like, what did you dream about, Mom? It wasn't anything like that.
And was there any history? I mean, I guess people weren't as aware of Alzheimer's as we are now. They called it senility or dementia or whatever.
Right.
In your mom's family, that anyone was aware of prior? Because your grandmother on her side was still alive, right?
My grandmother was still alive, but there are some, My mom grew up during World War II, so her family was kind of separated, and there are some like parts of the family tree that we never kept track of,
Right.
just because of the war and things happening during the war. And they were all in Germany, so it was kind of hard to keep in touch with people, like in the 80s when you were trying to correspond with people in another country, like you had those
Letters.
thin, you had those very thin airmail
Right.
letters. So anyway, we didn't know much about my mom's side of the family, and when she was diagnosed, it was a real surprise to us that suddenly we discovered that she didn't know what year it was. She didn't know who the president was. She didn't know how to tell time. And those aren't things you ask someone on a daily basis.
Right.
So we had no idea how far gone she was.
Well, you say at one point in the book, the sort of the tragedy of this all. I mean, there's a lot of tragedy, obviously, with you losing your mom and her losing herself to Alzheimer's, is that you only got to know her and she only got to know you for 24 years, even though you were in your 30s when she died. And it's such a striking passage in the book, because of course no one at 24 is their complete version of themselves, and to think that your mother only knew you as that person and not the woman that you grew into, not the mother that you became, not the sister that you became, the person you became, all these different versions of Maggie that exist, but likewise that you didn't get to know your mom beyond that point in her life when the illness took over, and that she was, so fundamentally different to you after that point. And so when reading the book, part of me thought, like, my gosh, what would she have made of this journey that you took? And what would she have made of your insights about her own illness? And I would just wonder if those are things that you thought about.
I think about that all the time. That's probably the biggest regret of my life, is that that I didn't get to know my mom more, and that she never got to know me as a woman, and I was an adult, but still a baby adult,
Yeah. You were still drinking cheap beer at 24.
Right. Yeah. I was drinking ice beers.
Maggie.
Yeah.
The tragedies.
I know. Yeah. So of course, I think about that all the time. I think about, I wonder like how we would get along, how with the kind of relationship we would have now. I know she would love my son. I know like that would be the biggest joy of her life. It's just a shame that she never got to meet him. She never got to see me as a mother. And then all of these things that I learned becoming a mother, like once you become a mother, you start to realize like, oh my gosh, all of these things that I do for my child, someone did that for me, So I suddenly had a deepened amount of respect for her. I kind of understood her more once I became a mother, and I never got to share that with her. I never, she never received the benefit of me like finally understanding.
In part, I wonder too, like your decision to become a journalist, even at that young age, when no one in your family was a journalist. Your dad was in the military, and Dad, if you're watching, is your dad watching?
No, he's not watching.
That's too bad. I do a great imitation of Maggie's dad.
You do.
Maggie's dad only refers to her by her full given name of Margaret, but he doesn't actually say her full name. He just says, Margaret.
Yeah, he makes it one syllable.
Yeah, it's the most dad thing I've ever heard in my entire life, is him referring to his daughter Margaret as but this choice to invest yourself in other people's lives as your job, when it's the total opposite of what your dad did and what your mom did and what your siblings do, was that just your passion? Was that a rebellion? Where did that come from?
I think part of it was being in a strict house. I felt like I didn't have a lot of contact with the outside world. I was in the house a lot, and I read a lot of books, and I always had a curiosity about the things that were out there, but I never got to experience them. you know, like other kids would go camping or like go on road trips or adventures or whatever. And I was always reading about it. So, which was cool. I love reading, but you know, at a certain point, like I wanted to ask people questions, and I always liked creating in that way. And so, like, I was the little girl who would make magazines for my Cabbage Patch dolls. Or I would sit behind my toy box and I would report the news. Like it felt very worldly to me, and I loved that.
I didn't know about your previous career as an anchor woman.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, when I went to college, my first major was broadcast journalism, until I realized, like, oh, you have to look nice and actually be friendly.
Well, look, if
I don't know if I can sustain that.
Yeah, if anyone from local news at KESQ, KMIR is looking, I think Maggie's ready to take over for Ginger Jeffries, delivering the weather.
Right.
Get yourself a red dress, you'll be set.
Yeah.
So this career that you have as a writer, this background that you have, and the sort of weight of your mom behind you, knowing, you know, for the next 10 years that that she was sort of in decline, but you were in those years essentially pulling further and further away from Ohio. You know, you moved across the country to California. You were traveling, you were doing interesting things. And I know that this is a big part of the book, is sort of the rationalizing and the dealing with sort of the choices that you made. To not be there all the time when your family was. How hard in writing the book was it to sort of take yourself back to that time and those decisions that you made?
You know, one thing really comforted me. I remember when I was trying to decide if I should move to California, my dad, with his own family, his mom had Parkinson's disease. And he wanted to enter the military. And he had a sister who stayed behind to take care of his mom. And when I was trying to decide what to do with my career, he sat down with me and he said, you know, my mom knew that the best thing was to let me go. Mm-hmm. And I know I need to let you go. And so I knew my sister would be staying at home with my parents. She lives like a 5-minute drive from them. And I knew it would cause probably some family, not drama, but it just, you know, just some tension in the family. Like when one sibling stays behind with you know, a parent who is in decline, and then another sibling goes. Like I knew that would cause some turmoil. But my dad, you know, he was really supportive of me moving across the country and doing the things that I needed to do. But in writing the book, of course, there's that layer of guilt all over again. Like I should have been at home. I should have been with my mom. And yet I don't think that's what my mom would have wanted for me.
No, I mean, you were living your life, you know, and you know, that there's a lot obviously about Alzheimer's in the book, but also the notion that she didn't know, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I struggle with too, is like, how much does she know and how much doesn't she know? Because I would go home on a fairly regular basis and I would see her in a nursing home and I would talk to her, and I think she was responsive to me in a different way than she was responsive with the rest of my family. But, you know, she and I had a different relationship than my sister, you know. Like I was the baby,
right?
You know, I spent more time with her, I think, than my sister and brother. So we just had a different relationship.
So the choice also to go on this trip, and again, for those of you who haven't read the book, we're not revealing anything that you don't find out in the first 25 pages.
Yeah. Like the first 2 pages.
Yeah. So the other, of course, remarkable thing about this trip that you take, and there's so much remarkable stuff, and I should tell the people viewing this, though Maggie and I are good dear friends and we host a radio show together, we've never actually talked about her book with each other.
Yeah.
And it's a remarkable book. It's a remarkable examination of grief, but also about the exuberance of living, about being in the moment. But you make a choice at the top, which is that this trip that you take comes right after you get married.
Yeah.
So you go around the world for, essentially a year right after your wedding. What was that conversation like? Did you have the conversation before the wedding or after the wedding?
So we had been together since 2003, and my trip was in 2010. So I think, honestly, I think if I hadn't gone on the trip, we wouldn't have gotten married. We made the decision to get married because I was going on the trip. And if something happened to me, in the remote wilderness of wherever, a boyfriend isn't going to be able to come help me.
Right.
So
we might not be willing, like, Maggie, no.
Yeah, don't know her. Yeah.
No.
No, and in some ways, I think that's actually, it sounds so overly practical, but I think it's also very romantic in that, like, I care about you enough that I want to be able to help you. I want to be able to, like, be an actual part of your life. Mm-hmm. So, like, legally. So, we had talked about getting married, and we had been engaged on and off for a long time. And then we ended up getting married. And then we went on our honeymoon to Peru. And then that's where I started my trip. But, our joke to people is always that we heard the first year of marriage is the hardest. So we decided to skip it.
Well, this will be something that you have absolutely no context for, but I was watching a documentary about a football player named Kurt Warner. And right before, the woman that he was in love with, her father was dying, and he was going to go to the hospital with her. And she said to him, I don't want you to be here if you're not going to be in my life for the rest of my life. I don't want this memory to include a person that was temporary. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, as I was reading your book, that kept coming to me, like, so you get married at this point when he knows you're about to go through emotional strife, when right. Jason's aware that, like, things are about to turn upside down. You knew your mom was sick. You knew you were going on this trip. And that's, it's a lot of weight for him to carry as well as you go in there. But that's not something a boyfriend can do. It's not something that someone that's not going to be in your life might want to take on. And so there's a lot of empathy involved for both of you as you go off on and to do this thing. I don't know if a lot of couples would do it or would contemplate it. But you both jumped out of planes for a long time together.
Well, that's how we met. He pushed me out of an airplane. He was my skydiving instructor, and I thought, I'll just have this fling with my skydiving instructor, like you do. Right. And I don't know that people do. Well, but I thought I'll have this fling. Right. And then, that fling turned into, something else.
And for people that maybe aren't familiar with all of Maggie's life, the movie Point Break is actually based on...
Right, yeah. I'm Patrick Swayze.
An early part of her career is based on Point Break. So now that you took a long time to write the book, you wrote the book over the course of almost 10 years, because as you were on the trip, and you don't really cover this in the book, but folks who are from the Coachella Valley will remember it, you were actually writing, little pieces for the Desert Sun about the trip. And some of them show up, bits of them show up in this in much different form. But you were keeping pretty assiduous notes because you were publishing some of the work as you went along. when you were actually finishing up the book, you know, a year ago, how much of it was still fresh, and how much did you have to go back and look at your old notes?
A lot of it was still fresh because some of those moments are just like seared into my memory, you know, like for example, when I was attacked by a monkey. like every detail of that day is still very vivid. Other things I did have to reconstruct, you know. I looked at a lot of photos. I took tons of photos. I also sent a lot of notes, or not notes, I sent a lot of messages to my friends and told them, like, you know, complaints from the road, or like just tried to like entertain them with some funny stories. So I had all of these bits and pieces in emails and messages, and I had Facebook posts. I had a very small sporadic blog. I also had a very tiny notebook. It's like this big. It's a tiny square. And I would do a couple bullet points every day of like, here are the things that happened. So I referred to that. And then I reached out to some of the people. Like I said, I made friends along the way. So I reached out to some people. For instance, there's a woman named Katie who is with me the day that my mom dies. And I wanted to have every detail of that accurate. And I was pretty confident that I remembered it, but you know, memory is fallible. So I checked with Katie. I reached out to her and I said, hey, I remember this happening this way. Is this how you remember it? And she said, and this was such a gift. She said, you know, I was keeping a really detailed journal at that time. I have journal entries from that day. Do you want me to send them to you?
Oh, wow.
So I actually had someone else's journal to work from.
Wow. And, you know, the amazing thing, too, is you have a great memory for the creatures and people that peed on you. So something urinated on you on every continent.
Basically, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, I was thinking about it because a friend of mine asked, he said, is this just like you pooping on trails around the world? And I thought, well, I did, but also a lot of those like really kind of gruesome details were edited out of the book.
That's good.
Yeah, no, there was a lot.
It's probably wise counsel.
Yeah.
So the book is out now, of course, and we're gonna turn it over to you guys for some questions in just a sec. But the book is out now. It's getting great reviews. People are talking about it that don't know you, and
that's so weird.
I'm wondering. I'm wondering now. You've put your life out there, and all these things that you did privately for your life are now up for public consumption. And I've told you personally not to go look on Goodreads, but I know that hasn't worked. But I'm wondering what it's like to have, you know, the best and worst times of your life up for public discussion.
Well, you know, I was a columnist for a lot of years. At the Cincinnati Enquirer, I would write some personal things. And then at the Desert Sun, I wrote columns where I would talk about some very personal things. So I was used to putting myself out there to a certain extent. This is, of course, the most vulnerable that I've ever been. And in the days leading up to the book coming out, I kept telling people that I felt like I was walking around without any skin, you know, like I just feel so raw and naked, and it's really uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable knowing that people are going to know family secrets, and but I think complete honesty was the only way to approach this story, and in order for it to work and for it to resonate with people, I really had to go to those like painful places and those naked places, you know. But it's not great. It's not great knowing that people could, you know, criticize me based on that. And I did go to Goodreads, and
Right.
there was one review that was like, you know, it was really anticlimactic after her mom died. And I was like, well, I'm sorry I couldn't, you know, prolong her life for you.
Can I tell you my favorite line in the book? Is
Sure.
that allowed?
Yeah, I would love
Okay.
to hear.
This is late in the book, and this is the point at which I realized that this is a book that if you have a member of your family that you've lost to Alzheimer's, or a member of your family currently has Alzheimer's, that I'm sure is going to resonate with you. And I've been thinking a lot about lately my own mom, who had essentially, I guess, dementia, and what that was like in those last couple of years, where, you know, you never knew what state you're going to find her. But you're right. Loving my mom through Alzheimer's was like 10 years of digging a tunnel with a spoon, only to discover that the hole I made was a grave. That's a lot, Maggie Downs.
It's a lot.
That's a lot. But I think this book does a really good job of not making that grave a terribly sad place. You know, I think what you've written honors your mom and honors your family and honors the life that she lived, and that you got to go travel around for her, that you got to do the things she didn't get to do. But that line right there, I was like, well, Maggie made me cry.
Well, and you know, I think also what I tried to do with the book was to show the duality of things, you know, that there are moments of grief, but there are also moments of lightness. There are also moments of being invigorated and being inspired and motivated, and really funny moments too. So I tried I tried to not make it all grief, because life isn't like that. And I think that is particularly relevant right now, because like, it's a sad time, but there's also joy. There's still beauty.
And there's so much weird stuff that you do. I mean, viewers, we've only touched the actual tip of the very bizarre experiences that Maggie had when she was traveling around. We haven't even gotten to the weird island of misfit toys that she visited. That's a story I'd never even heard, and I was shocked that I hadn't ever heard it. So there's a ton of amazing stuff. But we see that you have a bunch of questions. So let's bring up onto our screen Nancy, our events manager. Hi, Nancy.
Hello.
There's Nancy. Hi, Nancy.
I'm here.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello. The first question.
Nancy has been looking at the questions. So Nancy, tell us who's asking the question and then throw it out there.
One of the questions is from Linda. She's wondering how having a husband and child now has changed your wanderlust, and do you make different travel decisions now?
That's a good question. I still prefer to travel alone. It turns out I'm really good at that. And I think I need that. I need some solitary time, which I didn't realize before. But I also love taking my son places. And there were times when I was traveling solo on this trip, and like, women that I would meet would ask me how many children I had. And at the time I didn't have a child. And I always wondered, like, how would our relationship change if they knew I had a child, or like, how would we relate to each other? So it's been really fun to travel with him. He's been to 6 or 7 different countries now. He's a great traveler. I love seeing how he relates to people. And I love, like for instance, this past summer, we went to Mexico City, and I met every skateboarder in Mexico City, because he would, like, go talk to them and ride their skateboards. And so it's really cool to see the world, like, through his eyes.
Okay. What's the next one, Nancy? What do we got?
Oh, we have so many great ones.
Only give us the bad ones.
One of them's from Michelle. She said, dementia is so cruel on the family members and the family. So much suffering on all. How did you retain or get back the ability to feel joy and not be angry at what the disease did to you and your loved ones?
I mean, dementia is such a devastating disease. And it's really hard to find anything like life affirming or anything joyful about it. So that is something that I struggled with in the moment. It's something I still struggle with. But one thing I knew was that my mom wasn't the kind of person who would want me to sit by her bedside and mourn her. She would want me to live. And I thought, this is my opportunity to take her death and make a life out of it. And so, so that's what I did. I decided to live my life very differently because of how my mom died. And that's what motivated me to do this trip.
And I know, when you and I met, however long ago it was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, however long it's been, you had an active fear too that Alzheimer's was going to come for you as well.
Right.
I mean, and of course it's natural to feel that way because we know that it's at least somewhat inherited. But do you still have that same, like, I got to get stuff done because I don't know how much time I have?
Yeah, that's very, very active in my life. Like my sister and I, we will text each other like, oh my God, I forgot where I put my purse. Do I have Alzheimer's? That's pretty routine because we're both scared that we'll get it. So yes, that's still very active in me, but I think that's all the more reason for me to create these memories while I can, and to do the things that instead of putting them off when it's too late, I want to do them now.
Okay. All right, Nancy, give us another one.
This one's about your dad. Has he read the book? How does he feel about your revelations about your mom and your openness and vulnerability about it? And does he want his own book about his bucket list?
So my dad has not read the book yet. I tried to give him a galley, which are the advanced copies, and he refused the galley because he said the day it comes out, he wants to walk into a bookstore and say, my daughter wrote this book. And first of all, we didn't anticipate that there would be a pandemic that would close bookstores. Also, I said, Dad, you might want to read it first before you tell anyone that you're in the book. But so he went to Amazon and ordered some copies, and they arrived today. He said, remember, he's a military guy, right? So he said, they look fine. He hasn't read them yet. I don't know what he'll think. He had his own medical issues over the past year, and I thought, oh wow, like this is not what I want for my second book.
No.
But I'm willing to write that story. I don't want to have to write it though.
Well, I mean, like that's the other question. I think that as a writer, you've now written your memoir about a particular time in your life, but it also covers, of course, your childhood. But you don't want to just keep writing about you. As a nonfiction writer, you want to be able to go out there and, write about anything, because you don't want to constantly be chasing some trauma just for people's entertainment or for new floors in your house or something.
Right. Yeah. No. Although, as a nonfiction writer, there are sometimes where I will make decisions just because I know it'll be a good story. Like, I know you do it too, Tod. Yeah. So sometimes there are, like you say, I'm a person who says yes, but sometimes I say yes, knowing that well, I'll get an essay out of it. Or when I worked for the Cincinnati Enquirer, I was always the person who they were like, no one else will do this, but Maggie will do it. So it's like, nobody else will get a colonic and write about it, but Maggie will. And I did.
That's a perfect segue into the next question, Nancy. Hopefully one that doesn't involve Maggie's colon.
Eileen Shields asks, was there any great story or anecdote from your trip that didn't fit into the book?
There's a whole country that didn't make it into the book. So the country of Laos, which I loved. I had a magical time traveling. I only had good experiences, and good experiences do not make great narrative. So I had stories from my time there, but it was like, nobody wants to read about well, then I rafted down the river and it was great. And then I did these things and I was happy, So I was pretty brutal in the editing process. And I knew that the book was losing momentum at that point. So I just yanked a whole country. I'm sure it'll turn up in essays somewhere.
Right. You've got bonus material for the DVD.
Right.
And so if you're younger than 30, a DVD was something we used to watch movies on back when we were free. All right, Nancy, we got time for a couple more. Give us a good one.
Oh, there's so many. Okay, so from Kelly, how did you deal with writing about the family and showing it to your siblings? You already mentioned that your dad hadn't read it yet. Was that an issue, writing your story and putting it into the world?
I tried to forget about the fact that my family would read it someday. Actually, when my book came out yesterday, my aunt left me a message on Facebook that said, "Congratulations, none of us ever thought you would come back."
Oh my God. Oh my God.
And that's the first I ever heard of that. I haven't shown the book to my siblings because I didn't want to censor it. I didn't want to hold back in any way. I am nervous about the call I will inevitably get from my sister, who is a very avid reader. I know she's ordered it. She has not read it yet. So any day now, I will have an answer to this question.
The family is the hard part about writing a book. That's why I write fiction, because if you see yourself in a novel, I can just say, no, it's not you.
Right.
But if you see yourself in nonfiction because it's your name,
right,
it's hard to deny that fact.
Who's that writer, Anne Lamott, or Annie Lamott?
Anne Lamott,
yeah. She has this famous quote about if you didn't want to be portrayed in this way, you should have acted better.
Right.
So so I feel
your family
like
comes off just fine in the book.
Well, and I don't feel like I'm a person who's punching down. I tried to be fair, and in the writing of it, I think I found more compassion for people. And then I would only take myself as far as it was my story to tell. I would not try to project things onto my family. So, and I think that's fair.
Yeah. Okay, Nancy, give us another good one.
Somebody asked anonymously, and I'm also curious, what precautions did you take when you were traveling alone as a woman?
Oh, good question.
So, I'm a big girl. I'm very tall. I'm 5'10". And in a lot of places I was, and I'm not exaggerating, I was just a bigger person. So I feel like, not that bad things can't happen to people of all different shapes and sizes, but I do think that gave me an advantage, is that I have a certain stature. And I was often traveling with a hiking stick. So I would have a stick with me. I had pepper spray that I bought in Argentina. That was the only thing I ever had stolen from me, is my pepper spray. And it just disappeared from a hostel room at some point. And then I would always travel with these two small things, and I recommend that anyone traveling, male or female, carry them. I travel with a whistle so that I can make a loud noise, because if you scream, people can ignore you, but a whistle, people look. And it's really easy to hang like a whistle on a keychain or on a purse or, something like that. So I always had a whistle with me. Another thing, a third thing, I had a tiny flashlight that I could just press on my purse. But the other thing is that, those rubber door stops that are 99 cents. So I would travel with a rubber door stop so that if I ever felt like I was in a shady place to stay for the night, I would just put it under the door and no one could open the door. And it's very tiny. It fits into any luggage. And I do that when I travel internationally. And then I had kind of a shady experience traveling domestically, and I thought, it's really stupid for me to not bring this all the time,
Right.
because I think it's such an easy way to feel safe while you sleep.
And also, aren't you a trained MMA fighter now as well?
I have taken enough self-defense classes that I do feel like I'm pretty good, I think, at like the punches that could put someone's nose into their head. So
if those people stood stationary and let you punch them.
I'm not saying I could mess someone up, but I'm not saying I wouldn't.
She's not saying, she's saying, look, if you ever see me on the streets,
Right.
don't.
Yeah, don't front.
All right, let's take 2 more questions, and then we're going to release everyone back out into the wild. I know there's a ton of them. Whatever we didn't get to, all of them are answered inside Maggie's book, I promise you.
One of the questions is from Steven. He says, he mentioned that in the beginning you two were talking. It is so difficult for us in the modern days to focus on the presence. I wonder if you have learned something new by recollecting those vulnerable moments in the ways that shape the person you are today. What is the larger goal of building this intersubjectivity between you and your mom to your audience?
That's a good question.
I don't even know where to start. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have. That's such a multifaceted question.
Let's take it in parts.
Okay.
About the first part. Can you repeat the question, Nancy? The first part.
Let me see. He said, if you learn something new by recollecting those vulnerable moments in the ways that shape the person you are today.
Okay.
Since we're not focused on the present so much.
All right. So
does that help?
did recollecting change something?
Yeah.
I think.
Good question, Steve. We're hiring for professors, and send your CV in.
So I do think that, like I was just saying, in the writing about past Maggie, about past choices that I've made, and writing about my family, it cultivated a sense of empathy that I don't think I would have had otherwise. It gave me a sense of compassion. Like when you start to think about people as characters and like maybe why they made these decisions in the moment, and you start to think of yourself as a character, there's a lot of forgiveness that happens. Like you realize like, oh, I wasn't just making these bad decisions, it's because of this, or there's a certain sense of compassion that comes out of that. So I think the writing was actually really liberating for me. What was the second part of that, Nancy?
What is the larger goal of building this intersubjectivity between you and your mom to your audience?
So initially when I wrote this story, it was straight travelogue because I thought that was the most exciting part. I thought people would want to read about like skydiving and whitewater rafting down the Nile and getting attacked by a monkey. And I think those are all exciting things. But I think these universal themes of reckoning with your own mortality, of watching a loved one die, of just kind of carrying grief with you. I think all of these larger concepts are very universal. And I hope that when somebody reads this, it will give them maybe not alleviate their burdens, but at least make them feel understood.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, Nancy, last question. Make sure it's a good one.
Oh man, the pressure.
I know.
From all this travel, Kate asks, how long did it take to get back into the States mentally? Running water, electricity, etc.
It's a great question.
That is a great question. And there was a moment, and I've written about this in an essay that has yet to be published because I still haven't fully wrapped my head around it. There was a moment when I came back to the US and I went to Costco. And after going to small markets all around the world and having these really intimate experiences with like the people who grew your food or the people selling your food, and just going to a place where you could buy like mayonnaise in, you know, a gallon vat. It's so weird. And there were so many choices. Like I remember looking at the shampoo aisle at Costco and I was like, nope, can't buy anything here. I can't make a decision. How do you make a decision when there are 80 different kinds of shampoo? And I remember leaving Costco without getting anything because it was almost traumatic. So there was definitely like a re-entry period where that was uncomfortable, like shopping was uncomfortable. Feeling the comforts of home was uncomfortable because I spent a lot of time with people who, you know, had lost limbs to landmines, or women who lost their families in a genocide. And so it's really hard to come home and have a friend complain about like her Coach purse or you know, it felt so luxurious and a little too ostentatious. And then the other thing was driving. It was hard to go from not driving for a year and then come back and start driving again. And I still hate driving.
Well, that's the nice thing about a pandemic is I haven't driven anywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody who came tonight, thank you all so much. Maggie Downs, her brand new book, it's her debut, Braver Than You Think, is out now. If you want to do a mitzvah for a small independent bookstore that normally would be selling hundreds of books right now, go to mysteryinc.com. You can order Maggie's book from there. They'll send it to you with free shipping, or you can get it at bookshop.org or Amazon, wherever you do your book shopping. It's available everywhere. You can follow Maggie on Twitter at Downs and Dirty. You can follow her on Instagram at Maggie Inc. You can follow her on Facebook with her own name because she was smart enough to choose that. But Braver Than You Think is a fantastic book. I absolutely loved it. And I'm so excited for you, Maggie, and so excited that we got to talk about it tonight. I hope all of you had a good time. And stick around in the desert. We'll be back when we're allowed to be back doing live events at UCR Palm Desert.
And we have a radio show too.
Oh, right. We have a radio show, Open Book, that you can listen to. But when we're back and allowed to do stuff in person, we'll bring Maggie back out so you can get all your books signed, we promise.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.